Hello, I'm Earl Wajenberg, and this is Book Circle Presents. Tonight we are going to continue with Tales of the Dagda. Calperate Fair. Sandy watched the man stroll down the road and anxiously reckoned the best time to make his approach. It was hard reckoning because the man was so eccentric. He was dressed for riding but had no horse. He was dressed richly, brilliant blue cutaway coat, deep green breeches, shiny black top hat and boots, walking stick with a big brass knob on the end. But he walked alone, except for a dog. The dog worried Sandy. It was a great skinny, shaggy thing that he would have called a wolfhound, solid black. Sandy decided the best thing was to sit at the side of the road in plain sight. There were no trees or boulders behind which Confederates could hide, and certainly he himself did not look threatening, hatless, shoeless, barely clad in rags, unshorn and unshaven. He had a knife in his waistband, but it was at his back, and his hands were nowhere near it. The last thing he wanted was a fight. The man whistled as he strolled, sometimes broke off to sing, sometimes talked, to the dog, Sandy supposed. Sandy had heard him before he saw him. Now the man and his dog had seen him in return. The man stopped talking and singing, but went on whistling. When they were in talking distance, Sandy rose and bowed as politely as he could. Humbly. He felt humble. "Good day, sir," the man called, grinning. "A beautiful day, is she not?" Sandy blinked. He spoke with an Irish accent. Sir, to the likes of Sandy, moreover, had come out more like "Sir." He then stunned Sandy by raising his hat to him. "Yes, my lord," Sandy answered, picking a likely title, "and I'm very glad of it." It was a cloudless summer day on the rolling lowlands of Scotland. It was much the best weather to be out in when all you had were your rags. If only you could eat it. "And what might I do for you?" the man, gentleman, lord, asked. He had bright blue eyes and curly black hair and was still smiling. The dog also gave him a bit of a doggy smile, better and better. "I'd beg a farthing of you, my lord, if I might." He ducked his head again. It had become second nature. The lord looked him up and down, and the smile dimmed. Bad. But he extended a hand, and there was a farthing in it. When had he reached into a pocket for it? "Is that all you need?" he asked in a softer voice. Sandy recognized pity and flushed. But there were far worse things than pity, and you could eat that sometimes. He would take a venture. After he had taken the farthing and bobbed his thanks, he said, "I need a job, my lord. If you want, I'd be happy to fetch and carry for you, sir, my lord. I know I don't look respectable now, and you've no luggage at the moment, but you may later, and I'll run any errands you like, and clean up as soon as I may." The lord blinked thoughtfully and said nothing. "But if it's just the farthing, I'm still quite grateful, sir." "Is work hard to find, then?" he asked. It was Sandy's turn to blink. Was he fresh from Ireland, and had they not heard there? "It is indeed, sir. Have you heard of the enclosures, sir?" "No, what enclosures?" "Rich men buy up little farms or whole towns and claim the commons for their sheep. That's making an enclosure, sir. And the farmers must turn shepherd if they can, and if they can't, they must go tramping the roads, looking for work along with the men who were their farm hands." "And is that your case, son?" Son? Shaggy-bearded and weather-stained, Sandy looked older than the lord, if anything. But he was far from taking issue, and it was a friendly address at least. "Yes, sir. Farmhand, sir, as was, more than a year back." He bit his lips to stop the whole story and complaint from tumbling out. The blue eyes studied him some more. Sandy cast down his eyes and saw the dog glancing back and forth between his master and him. He looked up again and saw the smile blossom. "You need a farthing and you need a job, but right now I think you need a hot meal." "What?" The lord stepped forward, took him by the elbow, and led him a few paces off the road. The next surprise was that the lord sat down cross-legged in the grass and gestured for Sandy to do the same. He obeyed. The lord started unscrewing the big brass knob on his walking stick. "You can repay me by telling me what you know of Calperate Fair." A note of chill entered Sandy's confusion. No one likes to bring bad news. "There's no fair at Calperate this year, I'm sorry to tell you, sir. I've just come from there hoping to find work. But Calperate has been bought up by 3 rich gentlemen, and they don't choose to have the fair anymore." He tried to keep the anger out of his voice. Don't sound angry at rich gentlemen when you're begging of one. But the Lord sounded angry enough himself. "Dammy, I was going there to buy horses. Now I must think again." Yes, sir," said Sandy, trying to sound agreeable. "They had fine horses at Calperate Fair." "You know horses, son?" "Yes, sir. I was as much hostler as farmhand, sir." He brightened. Sir, if you have any horses—" "I mean to have," the Lord replied firmly. As they talked, he had stopped unscrewing the brass ball. He resumed and soon had it off. He placed the knob between them, hole up. "But first let's eat." The brass knob expanded, the hole opened up, and there was a bronze cauldron at least 2 feet wide. Even in the warm air, a faint steam breathed out of it. The smell of it set Sandy's stomach rumbling. "You've no objection to pork stew?" the Lord asked. None, sir." He plucked 2 long grass stems, which unfolded into long-handled wooden spoons. He passed one to Sandy. A dock leaf became a wooden bowl. He dipped it in the cauldron, then set it before the dog. The dog blew on it like a silent howl, then apparently waited for it to cool. Who are you?" Sandy half wailed. "I am the Dagda," said the Lord, "the king of the Irish fairies." He grinned. Sandy stared at the spoon in his hand, then at the cauldron. He was prepared to believe him. The Dagda took a spoonful from the cauldron. "Dig in," he invited. Wonder, perhaps, had distracted hunger, at least enough for Sandy to remember and hesitate. The Dagda saw it. "Right," he said, "eatin' with fairies, chancy." He laid the spoon in the grass, put his right hand over his heart, at least Sandy hoped there was a heart there, raised his left and said, "I solemnly promise before heaven that I will not use this food to claim you, and in fact I will not claim you at all without your leave. Good?" Sandy nodded mutely. The Dagda stared up at the blank blue zenith. "You see," he said, "I'm being a good boy." Then to Sandy he repeated, "Dig in, son." Sandy had not eaten since the day before yesterday. He dug in. The dog lapped. The Dagda ate, but with less urgency, looking thoughtful. Why are you... What brings... Sandy groped for a question large enough for the situation. "Why is the king of the Irish fairies in Scotland to buy horses?" Sandy nodded. "I'm in Scotland to be out of Ireland. It's a very busy place in fairy society just now. And I'm here to buy horses because we need horses. We need a lot of things. We've just concluded a war lasting... what year is it?" 1763, sir. Your Majesty." "Sir is fine, or Dagda. It's the name I'm proudest of. Anyway, a war of 9 years, and we must build up stocks of many things, including horses." Who are you fighting, sir?" "Giants, Jotuns out of Norway. They make their own horses out of thunderstorms, terrible strong and fast, but as witless as mist, and they go to pieces quickly. Their chiefs ride real horses, trollbreds, great black things from the ice times, like huge plow horses with 3 hooves to a foot. Canny as they come, too, but they had only a few. We had the advantage in cavalry, so they went after our horses hard." "Your horses aren't immortal, sir?" "Not all, not most. But they must be canny, able to feel and stand magic. You could get canny horses at Calperate Fair. Now I must cast about, looking for them elsewhere." He took another spoonful, looking grumpy. Sandy ate hard, trying not to look as greedy as he felt. Here was a benefactor not to offend. When you are that hungry, food seems a miracle. This food was a miracle. He thought hard over everything he had seen since the man, the Dagda, came in sight. There were good fairies as surely as bad ones, and this man must be a good one. When he could stop eating for a bit, he straightened where he sat and said, "Sir, I know I'm only a tramping beggar, but I'll help you if I can. I know the country hereabouts pretty well." The Dagda met his eyes and smiled. Still job hunting after knowing who I am? Yes, sir. Well, you're willing, that's a lot. You know horses, that's much. He cocked his head as if an idea had just entered it. But what I need most is a horse of my own right now to go scouting about on. Sandy looked down, feeling luck slip away. Sorry, sir. Not at all. Would you be willing to be my horse? Sandy stared, then slowly, You would turn me into a horse? The Dagda laughed. Oh, the look on your face. Yes, and back when we're done. Done with my errand, I promise. So you would be claiming me? Only with your leave. Let us say for a year. Then we think again and see how we suit. This is St. Alice's Day, did you know? So, on St. Alice's Day next year, you'll be a man whatever shape you were the day before, and we'll decide how we go on. If you agree, I promise. Sandy stared at him, stared and stared. After a bit, the Dagda resumed eating stew, apparently quite content to wait. Sandy tried to think it through. Spend most or all of the next year as the horse of a fairy master. He looked at the dog. The Dagda was dishing it another bowl of stew. A good master. Yes, sir, he said firmly. I agree. Thank you, sir. All right, then. The Fairy King extended his hand, and they shook on it. Eat up now. I'll have work for you soon enough. Sandy ate, trying to guess into a blank wall. At length, his stomach stopped paying attention to the stew and began clenching because it was about to become a horse's stomach and did not know how it felt about that any more than the rest of Sandy did. He put down the spoon. What shall I do now, sir? The Dagda smiled. Go take off your clothes. I have a use for them, and we don't want to get them ripped. More ripped. Sandy obeyed while the Dagda turned the cauldron back into a brass knob and put it back on the walking stick. The Dagda came and stood at his shoulder. Now, son, tell me your name. Sandy, sir. The Fairy King nodded. Good, but I meant your true name, your full baptismal name. Alexander James, sir. Why? It makes for a smoother beginning if you freely give it to me to use. He placed his hand on the back of Sandy's neck. Alexander James, thou art my good horse. And he pushed. Altogether, the warm hand on his neck became hot, the heat flooded his body, and he fell forward. He caught himself on his hands and found himself poised on fingertips and tiptoes. Only his vision was different. His eyes were pointing in the wrong directions. But after a few seconds, and it struck him later that this was an amazingly short time, he had it sorted and was looking around from about the same height, standing where he had been, only still on all fours. It had happened. He turned his head and saw the horse body, the coat the color of his own hair. Well, it was his own hair. He looked down and saw the forehooves. Indeed you are, the Dagda agreed, looking and sounding a little winded. Feel all right, son? Yes, sir, and I can talk. Of course you can. I've hired you to be guide, horse, and hostler all in one. We need to be able to talk, just not in public, mind. Of course not, sir. Now, let's get you some tack. The Dagda picked up Sandy's old rags and draped them over his back. Suddenly, there was a weight on his back and something tight around his lower chest. He was saddled. Some grass plucked from the roadside became bridle and reins. No bit? Sandy asked. It looks like there's a bit, said the Dagda. Did you want a bit? No, sir. The Dagda stepped to his side and suddenly was on his back. Sandy could feel this was a big man, but he could also feel his own new strength, making him fit to bear the weight. Where to, sir? To Calperate, son. I want to hunt up those lines of canny horses they used to have at the fair. That's the only place I know to start. You can tell me who to ask. Yes, sir. He took his first steps on hooves. And on the way, you can work out how trotting and canterin' go from the underside of the saddle. And galloping, sir? Let's save that for another day. Sandy stepped out on the road and began to feel his way into a walk. You won't regret this, the dog told him. He's a good master." "Thank you, son," said the Dagda. Oak and Rowan. The park before Barchester Cathedral is spacious, pleasantly shaded on summer days, and quiet, since traffic in Barchester is never heavy, and because the park is partially hedged with tall rhododendron bushes. The rhododendrons also provide scraps of privacy that many find useful: children playing hide and seek, lovers meeting, people engaged in quick business transactions. The Dagda found the bushes useful to appear from behind. Using just a bit of glamour, he could appear from behind the bush, whichever side of the viewer was on. He did so now, riding on a light brown horse. A shaggy black Irish wolfhound trotted beside him. Once visible, he of course attracted notice. Perched for all to see on the horse's back, he was a big, sturdy man with curly black hair and beard, bright blue eyes, and a white smile. He wore dark green tweeds and, of course, riding boots. He alighted and surveyed the crowd of children that had gathered to look at the horse. They were kept back by the dog, which interposed itself between its master and them and looked conspicuously unfriendly. "I'll ask," he said to several of the children who were begging to pet the horse. "You all right with that, Sandy?" he asked the horse, which nodded. "Very well then, for a bit." His voice had an Irish lilt. The dog relaxed. The children streamed by and descended in a fluttering, stroking, patting mass on the horse, which closed its eyes, lowered its head, and might even have been enjoying it. The Dagda surveyed the park, twirling a black walking stick with a brass knob extracted from the side of the horse's saddle. He seemed to need it to fiddle with rather than for walking. "Any sign of herself?" asked the Dagda of the dog. "No, sir," the dog returned in an undertone, likewise looking about. "That's enough now," the Dagda said to the children, chuckling but firm. "He needs to take a breather." Coming up to the horse's head, he said, "I see the bishop's bottle is still in business," nodding at the pub across the park from the cathedral. "You can change in the car park. It'll be quiet this time of day." The horse nodded again. "Yes, sir," it murmured. The Dagda gave it a friendly clap on the shoulder, and it moved off. The dog fell in with it. "Hey, where's it going? Is that allowed? Won't he get lost? They'll get hit!" The children's exclamations echoed the consternation on the faces of several adult onlookers. "He knows what he's doing," the Dagda assured the crowd. "They both do, and they both know how to find a pub." Laughter. People watched the two animals disappear behind a corner, then gradually drifted away. The Dagda looked around some more. "Ah, here she is," he said to himself. A woman on a motorcycle drove up to the edge of the green and parked next to a bicycle rack. Her arrival attracted much less attention. The motorcycle did not roar and moved with no noise but a hiss of tires. She did not go unnoticed, though. Her cycle appeared brightly chromed, without paint or labels. She herself was tall, leggy, and athletic, unhelmeted, in a deep red leather jacket and black jeans. The colors of her skin, eyes, and long hair matched the Dagda's. Male onlookers found their gazes flickering between admiring observation and checking for holsters on her hips. There were none at present. She strode to the Dagda and exchanged cheek kisses. "Hello, Da," she said. "Hello, darling. Thank you for coming." "To be sure. But why the fern cleft?" This was a large, secluded hotel in the countryside near Silverbridge. "Well, it's a nice place to stay. They're sundered, and there's a Curdian conference going on there now. A good place to go wife hunting." "A female scholar?" asked the Morrigan. Possibly. She'll be smart and knowledgeable at least. Probably brave." Curdians were scholars of the arcane. "Beyond that, it's a matter of individual personality. We shall just have to see." Two ravens flapped down out of the trees and perched on the Morrigan's shoulders. A few bystanders looked startled. "Go der dogger, Herra," croaked one. "Good day, Hugin," the Dagda replied politely. "And to you, Munin." The other raven bobbed its head and rasped, "Greetings, sir." "Do you know the fern cleft?" the Morrigan asked the birds, turning slightly to first one, then the other. "You were still working for Odin last time I was there." "He never stayed there," said Munin, "but he sent us to spy it out." "We know it," said Hugin. "Good. Fly ahead and—" The Dagda held up his hand for silence. All listened. Under the soft sound of breeze in trees and distant chatter, the ravens heard the commerce of birds and the scuttling of squirrels. The Morrigan picked out voices boasting and arguing, the clink of horseshoes, the crack of bats, all forms of contest. The Dagda heard a wailing child. "That's not tiredness nor temper," he declared. "That's fear and woe." He scanned the crowd, zeroed in on his target, and marched off. A blond child of about 3, barefoot and clad in a dirty t-shirt meant for an adult, stood wailing in the middle of the green. A couple of adults were already looking anxiously about for a grown-up in charge. The Dagda supplied it. He strode up to the babe, smiling broadly, then laid down his stick, knelt, and opened his arms. The child tottered in, still wailing. "What's this? What's this, my hero?" the Dagda crooned, raising the child in his arms. The sobbing diminished to gulping. The Morrigan came up. Hugin and Munin, who had lofted, landed again, one on her shoulder, the other on the Dagda's furthest from the child. All 3 inspected him. "Not clean," remarked Hugin. "That is the dirt of neglect, not of play." "Not fed well or enough," said Munin. "How comes that in this rich land and time?" "Your little hero," said the Morrigan, "is too young to be truly brave, but he could become so. He wandered off to explore and to see what he could do. He isn't afraid of big black birds fluttering around." Indeed, all the crying had stopped, and the boy was staring at the ravens. "His name is Niles," said the Dagda. "He's 3 and a bit. Let's find the family." The Morrigan bent down and picked up a forked twig. She handed it to the Dagda, who twiddled it in his free hand, then spun it on his fingertip, looking about. "Ah, there, the mother." He strode toward a young woman seated alone on a bench, engrossed in her phone. She wore a bright red halter top, jeans with artfully large holes in them, and high-heeled shoes of bright red plastic. "Are you missing this young fella?" the Dagda inquired, smiling. She looked up. "Oh, right. Is he yours, then?" "You can have him if you like." She looked back at her phone, her tone one of weary disinterest. The Dagda laughed nervously. The Morrigan, coming up behind, noted this. Her father sounded nervous maybe twice a decade. She also saw his back tense. "You don't want to be saying something like that," he admonished the girl with a thin frosting of jokiness on his tone. She looked up briefly and arched her brows. "Why not?" Back to the phone. Niles had put his arms out toward her and was squirming. With an effort of will, the Dagda put him down and watched him clamber onto the bench and seize the arm that held the phone. He cried a little, but there was no response, so he ran down, hung on, and appeared to zone out. The Dagda retreated a few steps to his daughter's side and leaned on his stick, watching. "I know what you're thinking," she said. He did not answer, but scratched his beard and brooded. Brooding was not as rare as nervousness, but it was an expression she didn't care for on him. Calculating, she remarked, "I might take him myself. He's a likely enough little chap." He turned to her with a fierce grin. "Ah, no, girl, the offer was made to me." That was more like it. The Morrigan nodded, satisfied. "I'll help." She looked down at the ground, where Hugin and Munin were trying to look like ordinary crows, without success. "Scout her out." She waved at the phoning mother, then retreated with her father to another bench to watch. The 2 ravens lofted into the treetops, then descended behind the bench where Niles sat with his mother. Silent as an owl, Hugin hopped onto the back of the bench behind Niles and edged toward his mother. The bird cocked his head and read her phone over her shoulder. Carelessly, the girl had left her purse hanging over the back of the bench. Munin helped himself to her wallet and began leafing through it. While they worked, 2 men strolled up to the Dagda's bench. Both wore jeans and t-shirts, but no shoes. One, tall and thin, had wildly shaggy black hair and beard. The other had light brown hair back in a ponytail and a neatly clipped full beard. They nodded respectfully to the Dagda because it was less conspicuous than a full bow, then took up positions on either end of the bench and tried not to look ceremonial. The Dagda's returning nod was silent and distracted. They followed his gaze to Niall's bench where the ravens snooped. "What's going on, sir?" asked the brown-haired man in the voice of the horse. Then, "Good day, your ladyship." His accent was Scottish. "Hello, Sandy," she answered. "We're shopping for changelings." "I thought we was hunting brides, ma'am," said the shaggy black-haired fellow uncertainly. His accent was Irish. "That too, Brian, but this chance came up." Sandy looked at Niles, hugging his mother's arm like a lifeline, half in an exhausted sleep, oblivious of the spying birds. "He's a nice-looking little fella," he said politely. Then, in a more troubled voice, "Likes his mum." Brian said nothing but looked uneasy. Both cast worried glances at the Anglican cathedral across the street. Sandy was still a good Scottish Presbyterian, and Brian a good Irish Catholic, or they tried to be, even after 250 years of service to the Dagda. But neither of them still thought God was picky about denominations, and Anglican Church was as godful as any other. Changelings bothered them, and what their master's grandfather might think of changelings bothered them more. This was the first time either of them had seen the taking of one. The Morrigan gave an impatient snort. If she had really wanted the child, she would have called her motorcycle, jumped on, snatched the boy from the bench, and been off with him to other realms. The Dagda stirred and said, "Don't get in a lather, sons." He smiled reassuringly. "We're scoping things out proper, and we won't put a toe outside the lines of mercy and justice. You should know me better by—" "Ah!" Hugin and Munin lofted silently off the bench, vanished into the treetops, then dropped out of them back to the back of the Dagda's bench. "She's arranging a hook-up on Tumblr," said Hugin, "or maybe a tumble-up on Hooker." "Her name's Jessica Pilder," said Munin. "I got her numbers, too." The Morrigan dug into her backpack and produced a tablet computer. She placed it on the bench, and Munin hopped down next to it. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, and began pecking. Hugin dropped down and joined him. Soon the birds began delivering. "She's on the dole, has a small inheritance from her mother. Never mentions the boy on her social media, just flirting and gossip. Mother died of liver, drunkard. Lives at 127 Skane Street, flat 4C, run-down neighborhood. Boy's father listed as Robin Mortimer, dead before the boy was born. Overdose. May never have known he was a dad. Boy's a bastard, like his mum. Cops suspect her of meth and such, matches hints on her social feed. Has a roommate, Dinah, another young woman, works 3 part-time jobs. She mentions the boy a lot. Nothing good to say of Jessica. Maybe this Dinah is the one keeping the boy alive." Hugin cocked a black button eye up at the Dagda. "You may have hit in the gold, sir." "The boy didn't, though," added Mugen. "He has now," the Dagda averred. He looked down at the other bench where Niles still dozed by his mother. "I'll see to it. Are we not the people of fate?" And we'll hear more from the Dagda next time.